Greetings! Welcome to TUV SUD MS Academy's ISO 9001-2015 Awareness e-Learning course. This course will be focusing on the new version of ISO 9001 requirements. It will also highlight the significance of organizational context, leadership, and the adoption of risk-based approach. Please note that in order to successfully complete this e-learning course and receive your certificate of completion, you need to complete 100% of the lessons and pass the quiz. The course will be available for 90 days upon purchase to give you enough time to complete it. Let's begin your ISO 9001 journey. The course objective is to have a detailed understanding and be aware of the ISO 9001-2015 requirements. This course will cover the following topics: ISO 9001 history, benefits of a QMS, key terms and definitions, followed by the high-level structure and quality management principles. I will provide an introduction to ISO 9001-2015 version, the process-based QMS model. This model is the heart and soul of this standard. After which, I'll go through the requirements of ISO 9001-2015 standard. Let me share with you the ISO 9001 history. Don't worry, it will not be too long. In the early years of ISO, for example in 1987, there are actually 3 standards. The 3 standards are ISO 9001, ISO 9002 and ISO 9003. These 3 standards have different focuses. For example, a company certified to ISO 9001 means that this organization has got design element and design activities. When a company is certified to ISO 9002, then this means that the organization's activities are only restricted to production, installation, and servicing. And when a company is certified to ISO 9003, then this means that the organization is purely doing inspection and testing activities. In 1994, the emphasis of the ISO 9001 standard was on quality assurance and using the methodology for preventive actions. It includes the documented procedures to manage quality control. The next version of ISO 9001 is in the year 2000. The focus is on process management and continual improvement. This is where the changes of the ISO kicks in. From 20 clauses, for example from clauses 4.1 to 4.20, it was changed into a high-level structure of a clause, meaning you have clause 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Changes and system evolutions continue. And in the early days of year 2008, the quality management system was further enhanced and improved on implementation for clarity. And the initiative for change continued. In September 2015, the latest ISO version was issued. New processes were added such that the context of the organization under clauses 4.1, 4.2, 4.3 and 4.4. Another new requirement is the risk and opportunity, which is clause 6.1, as well as the new clause 7.1.6 that refers to organizational knowledge. Therefore, from 5 clauses in the year 2008, we now have 7 clauses, namely clauses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. This gives you a quick snapshot of the quality management system documentation evolution from the year 1987, since the standard began to how it has progressed to date. You can see from 1987 to 1994, the focus was on 20 clauses on Documentation Procedures Manual as well as work instructions. In the year 2000, there were 6 mandatory procedures known as documented procedures required by quality management system. Organizations are required to demonstrate that the procedures are being established, documented, implemented, and maintained. In 2008, the standard was revised to improve the clarity of the requirements. And in the year 2015, the new version kicks in, where the quality management system was updated. It is now less prescriptive, leaving it to the organization to decide on what are the requirements on documents which are suitable to their business needs. However, the control and the approval of documents remain unchanged. To enhance your understanding, this chart illustrates the 3 important series of ISO 9000. Firstly, there is the ISO 9004, which is a standard that provides guidance to organizations to achieve sustained success by using a quality management approach. It gives guidance and goes beyond the ISO 9001. The next guidance document, ISO 9000. It describes the fundamentals and vocabulary of QMS and specifies the terminology used in the quality management system. Note that these series of ISO 9004 and 9000 are not auditable standard. The third series is ISO 9001, which is a QMS requirement. It specifies QMS requirements and focuses on effectiveness. It is used internally or for certification or for contractual purposes. And this document, or sometime we call standard, is an auditable standard. In order to conduct audits, an ISO 9011 is used, and it provides guidelines in auditing the quality management system. So, the next question is how the ISO standard is being reviewed. The flowchart illustrates the various processes in reviewing ISO standards. It starts from designing the specification, then it goes to a balloting process, the working draft, the committee draft. And it goes to another balloting, followed by the draft issue, which will go for balloting again. After that is the final draft issue, and lastly is the final official release, which is the publication. Therefore, looking at the ISO standards review processes, there is no one person making the decision for any changes they want to the ISO standards. Let us now go through the benefits of quality management system. The benefits to companies implementing a quality management system based on this standard are: the ability to provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. Facilitate opportunities to enhance customer satisfaction through effective application of the system and processes for continual improvement of the system. QMS implementation allows the company to address risks and opportunities associated with its context and objectives. It also provides the ability to demonstrate conformity to specified QMS requirements. Let us now go through key terms and definitions. These are just some of the key terms used in the standard. It took reference from ISO IEC Directives Part 1, Consolidated ISO Supplement 2015 version. The term and definitions such as the organization, interested party, management system, objective, competence, corrective action, continual improvement, risk, documented information, performance, context of the organization, monitoring, improvement, and knowledge. These are just some very common terms used in the ISO 9001 standard. Therefore, we need to know their definition in order to have common communication. The term organization refers to a person or group of people that has its own functions with responsibilities, authorities, and relationships to achieve its objectives. Interested party is defined as a person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive itself to be affected by a decision or activity. Management system is a set of interrelated or interacting elements of an organization to establish policies and objectives and processes to achieve those objectives. The term objective refers to result to be achieved. Competence refers to ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. The term corrective actions refers to action to eliminate the cause of non-conformity and to prevent recurrence. Continual improvement is defined as recurring activity to enhance performance. The term risk refers to effect of uncertainty on an expected result. Documented information are information required to be controlled and maintained by an organization and the medium on which it is contained. Performance refers to measurable result. Context of the organization is defined as business environment combination of internal and external factors and conditions that can have an effect on organization's approach to its products, services, and investments and interested parties. Monitoring refers to determining the status of a system, a process, or an activity. The term improvement refers to an activity to enhance performance. And knowledge is defined as available collection of information being a justified belief and having a high certainty to be true. Let's move on with the high-level structure of management system. We start off with Annex SL. Annex SL describes the framework for a generic management system. So how? In future, the management clause numbers and titles of all management system standards will be identical. The high-level structure enhances the consistency and alignment of different management system standards. Please take a look at ISO 9001-2015 version, looking at the key titles as well as the clauses. The next one is ISO 14001-2015 version. You also look at the clauses as well as the key titles. Finally, you look at this version, the clauses and the titles. Now in future, the major clause numbers and the titles of all management system standards will be identical. Therefore, in terms of identification of various standards, all these clauses as well as their titles will be identical. We move on to the quality management system principles. This is important to understand as we journey into the management system. The 7 quality management principles are customer focus, leadership, engagement of people, process approach, improvement, evidence-based decision-making, and relationship management. There are no major changes as compared to the quality management principles previously outlined in the ISO 9000-2005 version. The process approach principle is now revised in the current version, which is ISO 9000-2015. It is now revised so that consistent and predictable results are achieved more effectively and efficiently when activities are understood and managed as interrelated processes that function as a coherent system, hence removing the need for the principle of system approach to management. You can compare that previously there were 8 principles, and currently the new version has only 7 principles, with the removal of the principle of system approach to management. Introduction of ISO 9000-2015 version. So why the change? Changes were made to provide stable core set of requirements for the next 10 years or so, maintain current focus on effective process management to produce desired outcomes, take account of changes in QMS practices and technology since the last major revision was in the year 2000, apply Annex SL of ISO directives to enhance compatibility and alignment with other ISO management standards, facilitate effective organizational implementation and effective conformity assessment by first party or second party and third parties. Provide simplified language and writing styles to aid understanding and consistent interpretations of requirements. This is the process-based quality management system model. Let me take you for a ride. The PDCA cycle can be applied to all processes and to the quality management system as a whole. This figure illustrates how clause 4 to 10 can be grouped in relation to the PDCA cycle. Please look at the left-hand side. The inputs are organization and its context, customer requirements, and needs and expectations of relevant interested parties. And the outputs on the right-hand side, the expectation would be the result, which is customer satisfaction, the quality management system results, as well as the measurement of products and services. Understanding and managing interrelated processes as a system, which is right in the middle, contributes to the organization's effectiveness in achieving intended results. This approach enables the organization to control the interrelationships and interdependency among the processes of the system so that the overall performance of the organization can be enhanced. Take note, the numbers in bracket, which we call clauses, refer to the clauses of the international standard. The next figure gives a schematic representation of a single process and shows the interactions of its elements. The monitoring and measuring checkpoints which are necessary for control and are specific to a process will vary depending on the related risks. And now, we are going into the ISO 9001-2015 requirements. Sit tight, please. First, I want to give you a heads up on differences between the 2015 standard seen on your left-hand side, which has clauses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, versus the old version, which is the ISO 9001-2008 version, shown on your right-hand side, which has got clauses 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. We will go through clause by clause in the following slides. Clause 4 consists of 4 requirements, namely, Clause 4.1, understanding the organization and its context. Clause 4.2, understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. Clause 4.3, determine the scope of the quality management system. And Clause 4.4, quality management system and its processes. Together, the clauses in 4, which is context of the organization, requires an organization to determine the issues and the requirements that can impact in the planning of the QMS. There is no requirement to consider all interested parties. Only those interested parties that are relevant to the QMS and their requirements. Determining who is relevant and what is relevant is dependent on its impact on the organization's ability to achieve the intended results of its QMS. However, additional needs and expectations can be determined beyond what is required in this standard. Clause 4.3 requires organizations to determine issues and requirements and its products and services to be considered when determining the boundaries and applicability of its QMS, which we refer to as scope. In relation to applicability, an organization cannot decide that a requirement of the standard is not applicable, where a requirement can be applied within the scope of its QMS. However, the applicability of the requirements to an organization's quality management system could depend upon the size of the organization, adopted management model, range of organization's activity, and the nature of risks and opportunities it encounters. When a requirement cannot be applied, for example, the process may not be carried out within the organization, then the organization can determine that a requirement is not applicable. This claim of non-applicability of a requirement is valid, provided that it does not affect the organization's ability or responsibility to ensure the conformity of its products and services and the enhancement of customer satisfaction. The scope must ensure accuracy and clarity, and it is not worded to give benefit to marketing requirements. Typically, the following words, which are edited as appropriate of a scope, are used. Let's use 2 examples to illustrate how the scope should be defined to be clear and accurate. Example 1 for manufacturing industries: design, development, production, installation and servicing of telecommunication devices. Example 2 for service industries: provision of logistics services. This slide gives you a snapshot of Clause 4.1 requirements to determine, for example, what are internal issues and what are external issues. For external issues, it can mean material availability, the competition, or the regulatory requirements. It could also be the land constraints or perhaps the government policies and market demand. As for internal issues, it could be the company's objectives, their infrastructure, the resources, or perhaps in terms of operation, an example is machine breakdown, or very important is the communication. Clause 4.2 requires organizations to determine interested parties and their requirements. An interested party is a person or an organization that can affect or be affected by or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. The matrix provided here in the slides indicates examples of these inputs. The next clause is 4.3. Determine the scope of the QMS. The scope to include external and internal issues, requirements of relevant interested parties, and products and services of the organization. The scope shall be available and maintained as documented information within the organization. And lastly, the organization can only decide that a requirement is not applicable if its decision will not result in failure to achieve conformity of products and services and enhancement of customer satisfaction. Clause 4.4, Quality Management System and its processes, requires the organization to establish a process-based quality management system. The phrase establishes, implement, maintain, and continually improve is part of the PDCA process. When it is in place and operating, the QMS needs to be maintained and continually improved. Clause 4.4 set out this high-level requirement for the design of a process-based management system. The organization needs to determine the required process, input, and expected output. They need to assign responsibility and authority for processes and identify risks and opportunities for processes. And finally, plan on how to address this. The methods now explicitly include monitoring, measurements, and related performance indicators. Now we start off with Clause 5, which is leadership. Clause 5 of ISO 9001-2008 was previously titled Management Responsibility. It has now been revised to Clause 5 Leadership of ISO 9001-2015 with additional requirements as compared to the 2008 version. There are clearly enhanced leadership requirements in Clause 5.1 as compared to the ISO 9001-2008 version. Top management shall demonstrate leadership and commitment in the following. With reference to QMS firstly, the accountability of the effectiveness of their system, which is new. Compatibility of policy and objectives with strategic direction and context of the organization. Integration of the QMS into the organization's business processes. And they need to promote awareness of this process approach and risk-based thinking. Ensure that the resources needed for the QMS, quality management system, are available. Communicate the importance of effective quality management and of conforming to the QMS requirements. Ensure that the QMS achieves its intended results, and the need to promote improvement. And finally, supporting other relevant management roles to demonstrate their leadership as it applies to their areas of responsibility. Clause 5.1.2 Customer focus requires leadership and commitment by ensuring risks and opportunities that can affect conformity of products and services and the ability to enhance customer satisfaction are determined and addressed. Ensuring that customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements are determined, understood, and consistently met. Ensuring that the focus on enhancing customer satisfaction is maintained. Next, we touch on the policy. The policy must be appropriate to the purpose of the business and context of the organization. This policy provides a framework for setting quality objectives. It includes commitment to satisfy applicable requirements and the commitment to continual improvement of QMS. It must be available and maintained as documented information. Of course, top management needs to communicate this policy statement so that the people would understand and can apply within the organization. And it must be available to relevant interested parties as appropriate. Next is Clause 5.3, which is Organizational Roles, Responsibilities and Authorities. Top management assign responsibilities and authorities to ensure the QMS conforms to ISO 9001 requirements, ensure processes are delivering their intended outputs, report on QMS performance, ensure promotion of customer focus, ensure integrity of QMS maintained when QMS changes. And you can see the role of Management Representative or MR has disappeared in ISO 9001-2015 standard. This is an attempt to ensure that ownership of and accountability for the QMS does not center around a single individual. Duties assigned to the MR can now be assigned to any role or split across several roles. Also note that there is a new requirement for top management to ensure that someone is tasked with maintaining the integrity of the quality management system while planning and undergoing changes. The next clause is 6, which is Planning for the QMS. It consists of Clause 6.1, Actions to address risks and opportunities, Clause 6.2, Quality objectives and planning to achieve them, Clause 6.3, Planning of changes. Take note of the related clauses which is relevant to Clause 6. First one, Clause 8.1, is addressing the control of planned changes for operational activities, for the provision of products and services, and as a consequence of the actions determined to address risks and opportunities from 6.1. Requirement to review the consequences of unintended changes, including taking actions to mitigate any adverse effects, is necessary. So next clause that is relevant to Clause 6.1 is Clause 8.5.6. It is addressing unplanned changes. For example, review and control essential to ensure continuing conformity of the product or service to meet specified requirements. The last clause, 7.1.6, Organizational Knowledge, which is relevant to 6.1 as well, for addressing changing needs and trends with respect to knowledge within the organization. Clauses 6.1 and 6.2 remain essentially the same as the HLS with only minor additions. Actions taken to address risks and opportunities need to be proportional to the potential impact on the products and services. Quality objectives need to be established at relevant functions, levels, and processes, and also to be relevant to conformity to products and services and enhancement of customer satisfaction. Risk is defined as the effect of uncertainty on an expected result. Risk is often expressed in terms of a combination of the consequences of an event and the associated likelihood of occurrence. Risk is a preventive tool. Although risks and opportunities have to be determined and addressed within the organization, there is no requirement for formal risk management such as ISO 31000 or a documented risk management process. This risk matrix is only a simple sample to illustrate the impact and effect over the likelihood of the risk that could be experienced over a period of time, as well as the impact. Clause 6.1, which is actions to address risks and opportunities, requires the organization to determine risks and opportunities, develop and implement action plans to address these risks and opportunities, evaluate effectiveness of actions. Actions taken to address risks and opportunities shall be proportionate to the potential impact on conformity of products and services. Some options to address risks include the following examples: risk avoidance, eliminate risk source, change likelihood or consequences, share the risk, retain risk by informed decisions. Clause 6.2. Quality objectives and planning to achieve them. It requires an organization to set quality objectives for relevant functions, levels and processes within its quality management system. It is for the organization itself to decide which functions, levels and processes are relevant. Therefore, the quality objectives must be consistent with the organization's quality policy. Quality objectives must be measurable and take into account applicable requirements. Quality objectives must be relevant to the conformity of products and services and the enhancement of customer satisfaction. They must be monitored in order to determine whether they are being met. Quality objectives need to be communicated and be updated as appropriate. Information on the quality objectives needs to be maintained by the organization as documented information. Hence, planning to achieve the quality objectives, we have to consider what will be done, what resources will be required, who will be responsible, when it will be completed, and finally, how the results will be evaluated. Clause 6.3 is the last clause in Clause 6, which is planning of changes. This clause is an additional requirement relating to change. It addresses the organizations to determine the need for change to the QMS, wherein it shall be planned and in a systematic manner, considering the following pointers: A. The purpose of the change and any of its potential consequences. B. The integrity of the quality management system. C. The availability of resources. And D. The allocation or reallocation of responsibilities and authorities. We move on to Clause 7, which is the support clause. Clause 7.1.2 refers to people ensuring the effectiveness of QMS as well as their processes. Clause 7.1.3 refers to infrastructure. Clause 7.1.4 refers to the environment. Clause 7.1.5 monitoring and measuring resources. This is a new requirement that includes the old monitoring and measurement of equipment, which is Clause 7.6 of the previous standard. And this clause extends to all the resources required, not limited to equipment. For example, a wine taster is considered as a monitoring and measuring resource. Clause 7.1.6 Organizational Knowledge. This is a totally new requirement as well. The organization shall determine the knowledge necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. In general, Clause 7.1.1 requires organizations to determine and provide the resources needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the QMS. Then organizations should consider the capabilities of and constraints on existing internal resources. They also need to consider what needs to be obtained from external providers. The next clause is 7.1.2, which is people. The organization shall determine and provide the persons necessary for the effective implementation of its QMS and for the operation and control of its processes. Clause 7.1.3 refers to infrastructure. Organizations are required to determine, provide, and maintain the infrastructure and environment for the operation of its processes, and to achieve conformity of products and services. Infrastructure can include the following: buildings, utilities, equipment, both hardware and software, transportation, information and communication technology. Clause 7.1.4 refers to environment for the operation of process. It requires the organization to determine, provide, and maintain a suitable environment for the operation of processes, taking into consideration the social, psychological, and physical environment. Clause 7.1.5 refers to monitoring and measuring resources. It requires the organization to provide resources that are suitable for specific types of monitoring and measurement activities. Resources must be maintained to ensure continuing fitness for purpose, and appropriate documented information must be retained. As for measuring equipment, it must be calibrated or verified, or both, at specified interval or prior to use. And equipment must be identified to determine status. It must be safeguarded from adjustments, damages, or deterioration. When measuring equipment is found to be unfit for its intended purpose, the organization shall determine if the validity of previous measurement result has been adversely affected, or shall take appropriate action as necessary. Knowledge is defined as available collection of information, meaningful data, facts about an object, being a justified belief, and having a high certainty to be true. Organizational knowledge is generally gained by experience. It is information that is used and shared to achieve the organization's objectives. Organization shall determine the knowledge necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. This knowledge shall be maintained and be made available to the extent necessary. To address changing needs and trends, the organization shall consider its current knowledge and determine how to acquire or access any necessary additional knowledge and required updates. Internal sources for knowledge can include intellectual property, learning from failures and successes, capturing knowledge of experts, results of improvements in processes, products, and services. External sources for knowledge can include standards, academia, conferences, gaining knowledge from customers or external providers. Competence. Clause 7.2. Determine the necessary competence of person or persons doing work under its control to ensure the performance and effectiveness of the QMS. Ensure that these persons are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training, or experience. Where applicable, take actions to acquire the necessary competence and evaluate the effectiveness of the actions taken. Retain appropriate documented information as evidence of competence. Clause 7.3. Awareness. This is to ensure persons doing work under the organization's control are aware of the following. First, the quality policy. Second, the relevant quality objectives. Third, their contribution to the effectiveness of the QMS. And last, the implications of not conforming with the QMS requirements. In terms of communication, which is Clause 7.4, organizations need to determine internal and external communication relevant to the QMS, particularly on what will it communicate, when to communicate, with whom to communicate, how to communicate, and who communicates. Now we are touching on documented information, which is clause 7.5. Documented information as required by the standard. Documented information as required by organization as necessary. Documented information includes identification and description. For example, the title, date, author, reference number. The format, which are the language, software version, graphics. The media, either hard copies or soft copies. The review and approval processes. Documented information must be available and suitable for use at the point where you need to refer to. And the information needs to be adequately protected from loss of confidentiality, improper use, or loss of integrity. Documented information needs to be distributed, accessed, retrieved, and used. The storage and preservation of legibility is important. The control of changes, for example, update or update version, needs to be controlled. Lastly, documented information requires retention period to be determined and how disposition is done in case the retention period has expired. Here are some additional information or notes for reference. Maintain documented information refers to documented procedures. Retain documented information refers to records. With reference from Note A.6, documented information from Annex A of the ISO 9001-2015 standard. Appropriate means suitable for or suitable to and implies some degree of freedom. Applicable means relevant or possible to apply and implies that if it can be done, it needs to be done. This is a fundamental of a documentation structure. It could consist of the high-level quality policy, QMS framework, the process, whether they are in diagrams or flowcharts. Next is the supporting documentation. And finally, recorded evidence, which refers to the records or any objective evidence in terms of demonstrating the requirements. Note that the extent of documented information depends on the size of organization, type of activities, complexity of its processes, and competence of its personnel, which form up the whole structure of documentation. The next clause is Clause 8, which is a new clause that refers to operation. Clause 8 consists of the following. Clause 8.1 Operational Planning and Control. Clause 8.2 Requirements for Products and Services. Clause 8.3 Design and Development of Products and Services. Clause 8.4 Control of externally provided processes, products and services. Clause 8.5 Production and Service Provision. Clause 8.6 Release of products and services. Clause 8.7 Control of non-conforming outputs. Under Clause 8.1 Operational Planning and Control, an organization needs to comply with 5 main requirements for those processes it has identified in Clause 4.4. Quality Management System and its processes, as well as for those actions to be implemented as determined in Clause 6, Planning. These 5 requirements are: determine the requirements for the products and services, establish criteria for the processes and acceptance of products and services, determine the resources needed to achieve conformity to the product and service requirements, implement control of the processes in accordance with the criteria, determine documented information to be maintained and retained as necessary in order to have confidence that the processes have been carried out as planned. This clause also requires an organization to determine and retain documented information as necessary to demonstrate the conformity of the products and services to their requirements. The output of this planning shall be suitable for the organization's operations. An organization needs to control planned changes and review the consequences of unintended changes and take actions to mitigate any adverse effects as necessary. Lastly, an organization shall ensure that outsourced processes are controlled. See Clause 8.4, Control of externally provided processes, products and services. Clause 8.2, Requirements for products and services includes the following sub-clauses. Clause 8.2.1 is on customer communication. Clause 8.2.2, Determining the requirements for products and services. Clause 8.2.3, Review of the requirements for products and services. And Clause 8.2.4, Changes to requirements for products and services. Clause 8.2.1, Customer communication requires an organization to communicate with customers on the following: providing information relating to products and services, handling inquiries, contracts or orders, including amendments, obtaining customer feedback relating to products and services, including customer complaints, handling or controlling customer property, and establishing specific requirements for contingency actions when relevant. Clause 8.2.2, Determination of requirements related to the products and services requires an organization to ensure that they have complied with two main requirements for the products and services to be offered to customers. Firstly, to define the requirements for products and services, which include any applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and those considered necessary by the organization. And secondly, to ensure that it can meet the claims for the products and services it offers. Clause 8.2.3, Review of requirements related to products and services requires an organization to ensure that it has the ability to meet the requirements of products and services it offers to customers. Before committing to supply products and services to customers, an organization shall conduct a review to cover the following 5 requirements. Requirements specified by the customer, including the requirements for delivery and post-delivery activity. Requirements not stated by the customer but necessary for the specified and intended use when known. Requirements specified by the organization. Statutory and regulatory requirements applicable to the products and services. And contract or other requirements differing from those previously expressed. The organization must resolve contract or other requirements that differ from those previously defined. In case customer does not provide documented statement of their requirements, then organization must confirm the customer's requirements prior to acceptance. This clause requires an organization to retain documented information as applicable on the following: results of the reviews and any new requirements for the products and services. Under Clause 8.2.4, Changes to requirements for products and services, an organization needs to comply with 2 main requirements when there are changes to the requirements for products and services. These 2 requirements are: ensure that relevant documented information is amended, and ensure that relevant persons are made aware of the changed requirements. Clause 8.3, Design and development of products and services includes the following sub-clauses. Clause 8.3.1 General. Clause 8.3.2 Design and Development Planning. Clause 8.3.3 Design and Development Inputs. Clause 8.3.4 Design and Development Controls. Clause 8.3.5 Design and Development Outputs. And Clause 8.3.6 Design and Development Changes. Clause 8.3.1 General requires an organization to establish, implement and maintain a design and development process that is appropriate to ensure the subsequent provision of products and services. Clause 8.3.2 Design and Development Planning requires an organization to consider 10 requirements in determining the stages and controls for design and development, namely, nature, duration and complexity of the design and development activities, required process stages including applicable reviews, required verification and validation activities, responsibilities and authorities involved in the process, required internal and external resources, need to control interfaces between persons involved in the design and development process, need for involvement of customers and users, requirements for subsequent provision of products and services, the level of control by customers and other relevant interested parties, and documented information needed to demonstrate that design and development requirements have been met. Clause 8.3.3 Design and Development Inputs requires the organization to determine the requirements essential for the specific types of products and services to be designed and developed. The organization shall consider functional and performance requirements, information from previous design and development activities, statutory or regulatory requirements, standards or codes of practice that the organization has committed to implement, and potential consequences of failure due to the nature of the products and services. The inputs determined for the purposes of design and development shall be adequate, complete, and unambiguous. In addition, the organization shall ensure that conflicting design and development inputs are resolved. This clause requires an organization to retain documented information on its design and development inputs. Clause 8.3.4 Design and Development Controls requires an organization to apply the following 6 controls to its design and development process. Results to be achieved are defined. Reviews are conducted to evaluate the ability of the results of design and development to meet requirements. Verification activities are conducted to ensure that the design and development outputs meet the input requirements. Validation activities are conducted to ensure that the resulting products and services meet the requirements for the specified application or intended use. Any necessary actions are taken on problems determined during the reviews or verification and validation activities, and documented information of these activities is retained. Clause 8.3.5 Design and Development Outputs requires an organization to ensure that design and development outputs meet the following 4 requirements. Meet the input requirements, are adequate for the subsequent processes for the provision of products and services, include or reference monitoring and measuring requirements as appropriate and acceptance criteria, and specify the characteristics of the products and services that are essential for intended purpose and their safe and proper provision. This clause requires documented information to be retained on design and development outputs. Clause 8.3.6. Design and development changes requires an organization to identify, review, and control changes made during or after the design and development process as necessary to ensure that there is no adverse impact on conformity to requirements. This clause requires an organization to retain documented information on the following: design and development changes, the results of reviews, the authorization of the changes, and the actions taken to prevent adverse impacts. Clause 8.4.1. General requires an organization to ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services conform to requirements. An organization shall determine the controls to be applied for the following: when products and services from external providers are intended for incorporation into the organization's own products and services, when products and services are provided directly to customers on behalf of the organization, and when a process or part of a process is provided by an external provider as a result of the decision by an organization. An organization shall determine and apply criteria to evaluate, select, monitor, and re-evaluate the performance of external providers. This clause requires documented information to be retained, including retaining documented information of these activities and any necessary actions arising from the evaluation. Under Clause 8.4.2, Type and extent of control, an organization shall ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services do not adversely affect the organization's ability to consistently deliver conforming products and services to its customers. An organization needs to comply with 4 requirements as follows: ensure that externally provided process remain within the control of its QMS. Define both the controls to be applied to an external provider and those that it intends to apply to the resulting output. Take into consideration the potential impact of the externally provided processes, products, and services on the organization's ability to consistently meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements. The effectiveness of the controls applied by the external providers. Determine the verification or other activities necessary to ensure that the externally provided processes, products, and services meet requirements. Clause 8.4.3. Information for external providers requires an organization to ensure the adequacy of the requirements prior to their communication to the external provider. Communication to external providers would cover 6 areas. Its requirements for its products and services to be provided. The approval requirements for its products and services, methods, processes, and equipment, and release of products and services. Competence requirements including any required qualification of persons. How the external providers would be interacting with the organization. How the organization would be controlling and monitoring the performance of the external providers. And how the organization or its customers would be performing verification or validation activities at the external provider's premises. Clause 8.5. Production and service provision comprises of the following sub-clauses. Clause 8.5.1. Control of production and service provision. Clause 8.5.2. Identification and traceability. Clause 8.5.3. Property belonging to customers or external providers. Clause 8.5.4. Preservation. Clause 8.5.5. Post-delivery activities. And Clause 8.5.6. Control of changes. Under Clause 8.5.1, Control of production and service provision, an organization shall implement production and services under controlled conditions. There are 8 applicable controlled conditions, namely, availability of documented information that defines characteristics of the products to be produced, the services to be provided, and the activities to be performed, and the results to be achieved. Availability and use of suitable monitoring and measuring resources. Implementation of monitoring and measurement activities at appropriate stages to verify that the criteria for the control of processes or outputs have been met, as well as the acceptance criteria for products and services. Use of suitable infrastructure and environment for the operation of processes. The appointment of competent persons, including any required qualification. Validation and periodic revalidation of the processes for production and service provision, where the resulting output cannot be verified by subsequent monitoring or measurement. Implementation of actions to prevent human error, and implementation of release, delivery, and post-delivery activities. Under Clause 8.5.2, Identification and Traceability, an organization shall use suitable means to identify outputs as necessary to ensure the conformity of products and services. The status of outputs with respect to monitoring and measuring requirements throughout production and service provision shall be identified. When traceability is a requirement, an organization shall control the unique identification of the outputs. This clause requires documented information to be retained as necessary to enable traceability. Under Clause 8.5.3, Property belonging to customers or external providers, an organization needs to comply with 3 main requirements. Exercise care with property belonging to customers or external providers, while it is under its control or being used by the organization. Identify, verify, protect, and safeguard customers or external providers' property provided for use or incorporation to the products and services, and for property that is lost, damaged, or otherwise found to be unsuitable for use, an organization shall report this to the customer or external provider and retain documented information on what has occurred. A customer's or external provider's property can include materials, components, tools and equipment, premises, intellectual property, and personal data. Under Clause 8.5.4, Preservation, an organization shall preserve the outputs during production and service provision as necessary to ensure conformity to requirements. Preservation can include identification, handling, contamination control, packaging, storage, transmission or transportation, and protection. Under Clause 8.5.5, Post-delivery activities, an organization shall meet requirements for post-delivery activities associated with products and services. There are 5 considerations in the determining the extent of post-delivery activities required, namely, statutory and regulatory requirement, potential undesired consequence associated with its products and services, nature, use, and intended lifetime of its products and services, customer requirements, and customer feedback, Examples of post-delivery activities can include actions under warranty, contractual obligation such as maintenance services, and supplementary services such as recycling or final disposal. Under Clause 8.5.6, Control of Changes, an organization shall review and control changes for production or service provision as necessary to ensure continuing conformity with requirements. This clause requires documented information to be retained. The documented information shall describe results of the review of changes, person or persons authorizing the change, and any necessary actions arising from the review. Clause 8.6. Release of products and services. This requires the organization to carry out planned arrangements at appropriate stages, such as tests and inspections before delivery, in order to verify that products and services requirements have been met. An organization cannot release its products and services to the customer until it has satisfactorily completed all the planned arrangements. The only exception is when it has obtained approval from a relevant authority and, as applicable, from the customer. This clause requires documented information to be retained on the release of products and services. The documented information shall include evidence of conformity with the acceptance criteria and traceability to the person or persons authorizing the release. Clause 8.7. Control of non-conforming outputs. This clause requires an organization to ensure that outputs that do not conform to their requirements are identified and controlled to prevent unintended use or delivery. Appropriate actions shall be taken based on the nature of the non-conformity and its effect on the conformity of its products and services. This requirement shall apply to non-conforming products and services at the following stages: detected after delivery of products, during provision of services, and after the provision of services. An organization shall deal with non-conforming outputs in one or more of the following 4 ways: correction, segregation, containment, return or suspension of provision of products or services, informing the customer, and obtaining authorization for acceptance under concession. After the non-conforming outputs are corrected, an organization shall verify that these outputs conform to the requirements. This clause requires documented information to be retained. The documented information shall describe the non-conformity, the actions taken, any concession obtained, and identify the authority deciding the action in respect of the non-conformity. We are now moving to the last clause of ISO 9001-2015 standard. Clause 9. Performance Evaluation. It consists of Clause 9.1. Monitoring, Measurement, Analysis and Evaluation. Clause 9.1.1, which outlines the general requirements. Clause 9.1.2 specifically addresses customer satisfaction. Clause 9.1.3 refers to the analysis and evaluation. Clause 9.2, internal audit. And finally, Clause 9.3, management review. Clause 9.1, monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation. To meet the requirements of Clause 9.1.1, general, an organization shall determine what needs to be monitored and measured. The methods to be used for monitoring, measurement, analysis and evaluation to ensure valid results. When the monitoring and measurement shall be performed, and when the results from monitoring and measurements shall be analyzed and evaluated. Using the results from monitoring and measurement, the organization shall evaluate the performance and effectiveness of the QMS. Appropriate documented information shall be retained as evidence of the results. Clause 9.1.2 Customer Satisfaction. Customer satisfaction is still an important metric, and how it is being measured. It now includes obtaining information on customers' views, as well as having a structured approach to analyzing and evaluating all the information concerning customers' perception. Clause 9.1.3 Analysis and Evaluation. An organization shall analyze and evaluate appropriate data and information from monitoring and measurement. The results of analysis shall be used for evaluation. Conformity of products and services. The degree of customer satisfaction. The performance and effectiveness of QMS. If planning has been implemented effectively. The performance of external providers. The need for improvement to the QMS. The outputs from Clause 9.1.3 would be used as inputs in management review. This will be covered later in Clause 9.3.2, Management Review Inputs. Clause 9.2, Internal Audit. The clause defines the conduct of audit at planned interval. Organization needs to declare what kind of interval. Internal audit is conducted to provide conformance information relating to the organization's QMS and the ISO 9001 standard, and to assess the effective implementation and maintenance of the QMS within the organization. Internal audit program must be planned, established, implemented, and maintained. The internal audit program includes the frequency to conduct an internal audit, methods, responsibilities for conducting the audit, planning required for the audit, reporting mechanism, audit criteria and scope for each audit, objectivity and impartiality of the auditors being selected, report of audit results to management, prompt correction and corrective action. Retain documented information as evidence. Clause 9.3 Management Review is the same as the internal audit, where organizations need to determine the frequency to conduct review by top management. For management review, there will be two aspects. One is the review of inputs and the review of outputs. The inputs can include review of actions from previous management review, review of changes in external and internal issues, review of customer satisfaction and feedback, review of quality objectives, status of process performance, any non-conformities, status of the corrective actions, monitoring and measurement results, audit results, external provider performance, adequacy of resources, actions to address risks and opportunities, and opportunities for improvement. On the other hand, the output includes decisions and actions related to opportunities for improvements, any change to the QMS, and resource needs. Clause 10. Improvement consists of Clause 10.1 General Requirements, Clause 10.2 Non-conformity and corrective action, and Clause 10.3 Continual improvement. Under Clause 10.1 General, an organization shall determine and select opportunities for improvement and implement any necessary actions to meet customer requirements and enhance customer satisfaction. Evidence of improvement actions shall include improving products and services to meet requirements as well as to address future needs and expectations. Correcting, preventing, or reducing undesired effects. For example, if an order is delivered late to a customer, it is an undesired effect. And improving the performance and effectiveness of the QMS. Clause 10.2 refers to non-conformity and corrective actions. Actions taken is now recognizing the potential occurrence of a similar non-conformity elsewhere. Preventive action is now part of Clause 6.1, Risks. When a non-conformity occurs, an organization shall react to the non-conformity and take applicable actions to control and correct it and deal with the consequences. This is containment action. The organization then determines the cause of non-conformity and implements corrective action to address the cause of the non-conformity. After the implementation of the corrective actions, the effectiveness of any corrective actions taken would be reviewed. Then risks and opportunities determined during planning would be updated if necessary. The last step is to make changes to the QMS if necessary. Please note that corrective actions shall be appropriate to the effects of the non-conformities encountered. This clause requires documented information to be retained as evidence of the nature of non-conformities and any subsequent actions taken, and the results of any corrective actions. Clause 10.3 Continual Improvement. This clause requires the organization to continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the QMS. The results of analysis and evaluation and the output of management review must be considered to determine if there are needs or opportunities to be addressed as part of continual improvement. Note that improvement can be achieved by a recurring or by a singular activity. Improvement can be effected reactively, for example, corrective actions, incrementally, creatively, for example, innovation. Improvement can be effected by reorganization. We are coming to the end. Next is the conversion and process timeline. Look at the transition assessment under the new requirement. It actually started since 15th September 2015 when the standard was published. Organizations were given 3 years grace period for their conversion, meaning by 14th September 2018, all certification under ISO 9001-2008 will expire. Therefore, the important dates and timeline is as follows. The transition to ISO 9001-2015 must be successfully completed by 14th September 2018. How? Organizations can combine the transition audit with its upcoming surveillance or renewal audits. And new certifications starting from 1st January 2017 should only be based on ISO 9001-2015 version. We have finally come to the end of the training sessions. I hope that you have enjoyed this ISO 9001 Awareness e-training. And I hope that it might help you one way or another to have a better understanding of the standard as you proceed with your ISO journey. I also hope that you have gained confidence and good understanding of the new ISO 9001-2015 version and helping your organization to continue the implementation. Wishing you all well and have a great success in your ISO journey.